From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Welcome to the Management Brief. This month we are talking with leaders who have gone through their own personal transformations and had to rethink their role and how they manage. Today, Josh, Howell, and I are joined by Carl Klemm, former executive at General Motors who joined Toyota mid-career and led Toyota operations in the UK and Europe, including time as the president of Toyota in Poland. We'll talk with Carl about his experience and learning throughout his career, also for our readers and our listeners. Carl has written a great book called The Balance of Excellence, based on his experiences leading production in Toyota, that delineates his thinking about the Toyota production system and why it has made Toyota successful. More importantly, how it can practically be applied by leaders with a vision of driving their organization towards performance excellence, and also for those people helping their leaders and organizations on the journey. Okay, enough said. Hello, Carl. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Josh.
Hey, Carl.
So maybe let's start by you introducing yourself to our audience and overviewing your work, career, and experience with the Toyota production system and Lean.
Okay. Yep. Well, I started my career as an apprentice a long time ago with General Motors in the UK. And I selected those because they had although they didn't pay the most, they did have the best credentials and the best apprenticeships at the time. I did 5 years there as an engineering apprentice, and then continued with them as, first of all, engineer and then a supervisor in the quality assurance divisions, working through many parts of the organization. Then moved on to manufacturing and reached general manager level after 24 years with the company. At that time, I was general manager of manufacturing of the paint facility, and also introducing a brand new paint facility, and at the same time was general manager for quality assurance. Then I was headhunted by Toyota in the UK. They came to England first because then we were in the European Union, and it was a great place where everybody spoke the same language they could all speak, basically. I was recruited to be the general manager for quality assurance for Toyota UK. And I did that role for 5 years, and then went in to be the general manager of all manufacturing for the next 7 years. And after that, I went back to quality assurance as director for 3 years because we were introducing our current product at the time into the Japanese market, which hadn't really been done successfully before. So it was a big challenge. We succeeded. We sold there for several years, and we actually made money out of the business, which was very nice. And then I moved up to the engine plant in Deeside, worked there for 5 years, at which time we went through the Lehman shock crisis, and also started the Toyota Lean Management Center, which was my baby, my dream from the beginning. And then after that, went to Toyota in Poland, where I served 6 years as the president and CEO of Toyota Poland. I retired in December 2015. And after that, I wanted to continue working with companies to share what I'd learned. So I set up my own company, the Carl Klemm Management Solutions Limited, and worked with many companies and different kinds of organizations, not just manufacturing, but many different kinds. For example, with the health service, with the UK Energy Management Supply Company, the National Grid, and many other organizations in England and in Europe and other countries. Then I wrote the book, which you talked about, The Balance of Excellence, because I'd learned from my experiences, all summed up, that actually there was a bit of a roadblock in getting the message across to the top management of organizations. So I wrote the book to support that. And that's it. And now you and I are talking, and that's about the history that I've got.
That's fascinating. That's I would say, a pretty illustrious career. So I think we're gonna dig into a lot of that and what you learned over the course of it. So let's start a little bit by thinking back to your time at General Motors. Share with audience some defining experiences during that time that shaped your thinking in terms of how to manage production and people.
Probably the two most influential experiences I had, Mark, were right at the beginning and almost at the end of my career with GM. Right at the beginning, when I was doing my apprenticeship, I did quite some time in industrial engineering. It came as quite a shock to find that the opinion and the relationship with industrial engineering within the company was dreadful. Everybody who dealt with industrial engineering hated them. The supervisors hated them because they made their jobs more difficult. The workers hated them because they just demanded more work for the same money. The trade unions hated them because they basically didn't listen to the trade unions. And it was a terrible relationship that actually paralyzed improvement on the shop floor. There was no open-mindedness at all. That everybody was so busy defending themselves against what they perceived as the unfair demands of industrial engineering that any suggestion of improvement was met with resistance by basically all concerned. So that was a real former of what I understood was happening in the organization. And right at the end of my time with GM, I had the opportunity, as I said, to introduce a new paint shop. And at that time, I'd studied as part of a study team of senior executives with GM in Europe to understand about the new United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated NUMMI joint venture in Fremont in California. We went and studied it, and we learned a tremendous amount about what was different. One of the most different things we found was actually the relationship between the members of the organization and the organization itself, and who took responsibility for what and how it worked. And because I was introducing a new paint shop, and because at that time in GM, if you were general manager level, basically you had a free hand to do whatever you wanted. That people looked at the bottom line, but whatever you wanted to do, you could do. So in introducing the new paint shop, I took the opportunity to introduce the organizational structure and also the philosophy and the principles that I'd learned from Toyota. And to be honest with you, the implementation was, if you look at it on paper, you could tick all the boxes. It worked, but it didn't bring the business benefits. So I was really, really disappointed. I thought I'd done a really good job, and then I realized that I didn't know half of what I needed to know. So from that point on, when I was invited to join Toyota, I was really thrilled. So that's those are the two formative things I think that I remember from my time with GM.
Okay, well, maybe one more question about your time at GM too. Like, how did GM help develop your thinking about what was required to run a successful company for the long term?
Yeah, it's that's a really interesting question, because the long term in GM at that time was the end of the current model, or basically that was about it. And in the meantime, you focused on day to day, week to week, meeting the the schedules and the mix and etc. that was required. So longer term, I understood that GM really focused on a couple of things. They focused on model design, product design, as probably the biggest effort, because they recognize that secured as much of the future as possible. They also made good use of technology and investment, strategic investment. And because the influence on the day-to-day operating of the organization, wherever it was in the world, wasn't so strong, then the thinking was basically, we have a strategy, it will depend upon innovation, it will depend upon attractiveness of design, and it will depend upon technology. all supported by investment, of course.
So Carl, I guess you've shared a little bit about some of your key takeaways from your experience at General Motors. You mentioned that through this headhunting recruitment, you ended up making the transition to Toyota. Could you speak to, I guess, what were some of the key reasons behind making that change mid-career? What was it that drove you to accept the position with Toyota?
Yeah, George, the studying that we'd done with Toyota had whetted my appetite.
Yeah.
The fact that I tried to implement it really in the best circumstances possible, if you like, a greenfield site, and then really hadn't seen the benefits. But I knew from a first-hand experience that the benefits were there. So I was I was really up for it. I really wanted to join. I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand. I wanted to be able to do it, not just understand it, but be able to do it and make it work and get the benefits and understand what made the difference between getting the benefits and not getting the benefits because I'd done it and not got them. Yeah, that was my biggest motivator of anything. And when I was interviewed by the president of Toyota UK, he said, "Why do you want to join Toyota?" And I said, because I've tried to do what I learned that you do, and I failed miserably. And I want to learn how to do it properly, and then I want to share it with as many organizations as I possibly can. And he laughed when it was interpreted for him, and he nodded and said, "Welcome to Toyota." And that was so. Yeah, that's what made me want to join.
Yeah. You presented a learner's mindset. So once you joined Toyota, Carl, what were some of the key things that you noticed that were different in working for Toyota from the experience that you had had prior working for GM?
Now, that's exactly the same question that the first time I went to Japan, the Toyota brothers asked me. One of the big differences with GM and Toyota was in GM, I'd been there 24 years. I was general manager class. I'd made a lot of good things and was really pleased. And in all that time, I met one junior vice president of GM who passed and said hi, and then that was that. Whereas in Toyota, I'd been there probably between 2 and 3 weeks at that time, and I was sitting in Japan, in Toyota City, in Toyota itself, having a cup of tea with the Toyota brothers. And and that was a very big difference in my mind between how GM views people and how Toyota views people.
Mm.
And that really did really did strike me. Yeah, that was probably a key one.
Is there a defining experience from that time that kind of sticks out where I guess your colleagues, your Toyota colleagues, were illustrating the difference in kind of fundamental thinking or basic thinking that exists inside Toyota again versus as compared with GM?
You mentioned earlier on, right at the beginning, you mentioned about the the long-term thinking. And I go back again to that same meeting with the Toyota brothers and just sitting there talking with them. And it was the usual stuff, do you have hobbies? Do you have a wife? Do you have children? The usual stuff. And then one of the Toyota brothers turned to the other and said something for a few minutes and then turned back and looked at me and smiled. And then they carried on the conversation as though nothing had happened. And when we got out of the meeting, I said to the interpreter, "What actually did he say?" And he said, going into Europe is really going to be a challenge. These guys there's so many players in the market. They're experienced, they're clever people, they have great designs, they have a great supply network already established, they have a great distribution network already established. This is really, really something different from what we've experienced before. Maybe in about 35 years, we're going to start making net profit out of this activity. But in the meantime, just think how much we're going to learn.
Could you imagine heads of industry today and in today's stock market just accepting that the returns will come in 35 years?
Yeah, exactly.
Even 35 months.
Yeah.
Would require patience that only one can find in a saint, I think.
Yeah. It was a mind-setting kind of experience.
So surely at various points in your career, maybe while you were still with GM or even in those early days when you were with Toyota, you would have seen things that GM was doing that would have been, in your view, in your perspective, better than things that you were seeing happen at Toyota. What were some of those things, and did that sort of opinion about GM's overperformance or outperformance kind of sustain, or did things that your sort of perspective change over time as you got more and more familiar with Toyota's business system, TPS?
Yeah, I mean, before I joined, I already knew that Toyota was far, far in advance of GM in terms of management maturity of the shops and the shop floor. But honestly, I felt at the time that that the control of the office side, the sort of white collar headcount of the organization in GM was much stronger than that of Toyota. Uh, and it almost felt out of control in Toyota compared with GM. And that was a strong initial impression, which I carried for a long time. And it wasn't until I came to a certain level in the organization where I began to realize the more strategic elements. That made it clear to me that actually Toyota operates quite differently on a global basis than GM. And the planning and strategic activity is much more intense. And from that point of view, there wasn't surplus headcount. In fact, they were stretched. And it took a lot of years to learn that. But the initial impression was GM is better in office headcount. But also at the time, and maybe even for the Japanese, one of the guys who was a sensei of mine, who was later the head of Toyota Europe, and then became one of the executive vice presidents, he reflected to me. He said, you know, the other car manufacturers are much quicker at making decisions than we are. They're kind of agile compared with we are when it comes to decision making, and I kind of envy that. He said, because we are really slow in planning and decision making compared with them. And then I pointed out to him, yeah, but then when we made the decision, we execute, you know, quicker, better, cheaper than they would even dream of executing, and with much less investment always. So
Yeah,
it's a balance, but those were the things that were seen.
so over the course of your time with Toyota in Europe, you held several different leadership positions. You gave us an overview of that when you introduced yourself earlier. What did you come to understand is the view that Toyota has of the role of leader?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I was given a hint about that when I first went to Japan. One of the executive vice presidents gave a little presentation, a little slideshow, and in the slideshow he showed one image, and that was the image of two wheels joined by a rigid axle. And I never saw it after that. I only saw it from him. But he explained that one wheel is the business priorities, the business progress, the business benefit. And the other wheel is the development of the people in the organization, and they are joined by a very rigid axle. And so therefore, the role of management is to turn that axle. And of course, making the strategy, making the long-term, medium-term, short-term vision is top management's job, but also is turning that axle and turning those two wheels in harmony. Because if they're not in harmony, if they're not moving at the same speed as each other, then you go off course from the very fastest progress that you can make. And so the management's job is to keep those wheels in line. And that's a true key difference between Toyota and other organizations that I've come across.
Well, having read your book, I know that metaphor stuck with you.
It's the very first diagram on the first page of chapter 1.
Now that we've brought up your book, let's talk a little bit about it. In the book, you speak to the role of leaders in creating a positive environment through the use of and-on, which can apply to every task at every level in the organization. Maybe you can explain your thinking around this concept a little more for our audience.
It's so important. I'm glad you asked. And it's not just in every level of the organization, it's in every organization. So it doesn't matter whether it's a manufacturing organization, a service organization, it really doesn't matter. This concept is so fundamental and important, especially if you want the organization to develop as quickly as possible and to truly head for excellence and for strong power within the organization to handle things. And probably your audience or our audience may be very familiar with the term and-on, but just briefly, it means practically on the line in Toyota, there's a cord which runs down the side of the conveyor line, and it's within easy reach of the member doing the process. And if they come across anything that either they're not quite sure of or they know is a problem, they pull the and-on and they carry on with their standardized work. And the team leader hears a tune, sees a flashing light, and knows exactly where to go, and is in there working with them, helping them within seconds. And the first thing the team leader says is, "Thank you for pulling the and-on. What you got?" And the point is the team leader will then contain the situation so the member can continue with their standard work. But if they can't contain the situation by the end of that cycle time, then the line will stop. So that situation doesn't leak. So the and-on not only highlights problems in real time, but it also allows the organization to immediately try to contain that problem and maintain the process speed and cycle time. And that concept is something that allows team members to add the greatest value. It allows, for example, for engineers or specialists or project leaders and project members, it allows them to challenge more than they normally would, knowing that there is this support available. And pulling the and-on is an expected part of the role. It's not pulling it is kind of a problem if there's an issue. And the response that they get to the and-on means that whether it's a project or whether it's a daily volume of production or whatever it is, it means that you can meet the plan, and therefore you don't have to start replanning and rescheduling and making all sorts of special activities. You can just proceed with the plan, and at the same time your members can challenge much more developmental activities. So it's so important and it's so fundamental, and I don't think everybody understands the necessity of it in their organization.
I want to expand a little bit on that. So because our audience is from a variety of industries, healthcare, construction, other types of organizations. Tell how that applies, as you mentioned, in like more specifically in an industry like healthcare or others.
Surely. If you take the people that I've worked with at the sharp end of the business in healthcare, the people that touch the patients, the people that get hands on, they are the most dedicated group of individuals I've ever come across in my life. I haven't met anybody who is not a dedicated, caring, full-on carer. But they often meet situations where they can have an issue. And in their case, generally, it means that their work is delayed because they don't have this culture. But if they had the culture, then the work would be supported. And at the same time, for organizations that are handling a flow through of patients, like an external out clinic, if you like, where people can come in, like an emergency unit or something, then in order to cope with the workload, many issues arise, and the usual result of that is that there's a big queue of people waiting for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours even, and waiting for emergency or external care. And the use of the and-on means that wherever we've used it, the person doing delivering the care can pull the and-on quickly if they see something strange, and then they get support. And the throughput from those units and the level of good care of those units is maintained. So it means that there is much less of this, I'm waiting for ages to see somebody.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Very practical.
So talk a little bit more about your book. You speak to the Toyota journey from reactive to stabilizing to proactive and to progressive. How did that apply? That's important, like I think fundamental thinking in your book. How did that apply in Toyota, and how have you seen that applied in other organizations?
These are what I call levels of management maturity. And at the first level of management maturity is basically I react to whatever happens around me. And the second level is I've got control of what's happening around me, and I can just keep smooth, and I can maintain schedule, and I can maintain the quality output that I need for my product or service. And then the next level means now I can begin to do Kaizen. I can begin to reduce costs. I can begin to improve throughput. I can begin to reduce inventory and all of these other things. And finally, progressive means I can now understand that the organization underneath me will be doing all of those things almost by itself. And now I can really focus on what does the world need from our organization in the coming 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And of course, Toyota does that. Toyota is thinking 25, 30 years ahead, always. Hence, they've been able to introduce new technology that was breakthrough time and time again. For example, the hybrid technology, when it came out in 1984, well, half the world didn't even know what it was or why it was there until about 1995. It's just that far ahead. But they recognized the need, and they developed the product and introduced it. So most organizations that I've met, when we ask the management team to assess themselves, because I made some indicators as to where you would be at each stage, and then you can look at those indicators and then decide where you are at each stage. And most of the organizations, when I say, please assess yourself, they say, oh, we're progressive, or we are proactive. And I say, okay, now reassess yourself, but answer these two questions. First of all, for the things that we're doing, what percentage of our organization are actually doing those things as part of their normal business? And secondly, for those that are doing them as a part of the normal business, how are the results of that activity showing on the bottom line of the business? And then they all come back to, well, I'm either basically reactive or I'm stabilizing. So the organization that is stabilizing is getting control of the processes. And upon those processes, you can then start to implement proactive activities. If you try and implement them before you reach stabilization stage, then all you're doing is you're putting an enormous burden on the organization's people. You're creating more difficulties for everybody, and it can't sustain. It doesn't sustain. And that is one of the underlying reasons why many organizations, for all the best will in the world and the biggest hearts you can imagine, just can't sustain it. And they say, this is no good. This lean stuff is no good. For them, it isn't, because they've skipped a step. Organizations are not across the board either stabilizing or reactive or proactive, but different parts within the organization can be at different levels. And an organization part that is already stabilized doesn't need to wait for everybody else to catch up before they can move on. So the progress can be on a micro level and a macro level, which is true of everything that Toyota does. Everything can be applied at the micro level and just as well at the macro level.
Okay, great. For those of in the audience who are earlier on their lean journey, are there some key things that they should consider as they get started or try to broaden their efforts?
Some very important things. One is first to establish the situation of mutual trust and respect, because without that, everything is difficult. And my experience that I told you about with the GM way back at the beginning, where there was no mutual trust and respect, literally was a massive roadblock. So if the organization doesn't have that as a baseline, where there's open communication, where there's trust, where there's real respect for people's capacity and potential and achievements, then it's really difficult. Secondly, I would say if you want to make progress, then use the right-hand wheel to drive the progress. The right-hand wheel is the business progress wheel of the two wheels with the axle. Let that drive the progress. Let it be the priority setter. Let it be the one that decides for the best bang for the buck on the bottom line of the business, where do we need to do what next? And then once you've decided that, decide what tools you will need or could benefit from using to do that activity that you can learn. For example, problem solving or Kaizen or project management, or I don't know what, Hoshinkanri. Whilst doing that activity, use the tool and learn how to use it by doing it and get good at it by doing it. And that way, what happens is that you avoid two of the big pitfalls. One is that the activity is seen as something in addition to performing the performance of the business now. In fact, it is how we are making the business perform better now as normal business. And secondly, it means that it basically costs nothing to implement, because even if you have to bring in outside resources, which you probably will, to support, because you need experts and you need people who can help, the business benefit will pay for it. So this is a really, really, I think, a fundamental difference between how most people try to implement compared with how Toyota implemented, because they implemented that way. And they only added one more thing, which was, if I'm going to work in this area on this thing, then my next priorities are this, and therefore I will bring some people from those areas in to this activity so that they know how to do it when it comes to their turn for their next activity. So that kind of thinking is very important, I think. And the third, probably, and final thing that I'd like to say is because it is part of normal everyday business, because it needs to be part of how we do things rather than a skill that we've got in addition to what we do, then it's important that all levels of the management team, right to the top, not only understand these tools, but can use them. Because the normal business day, the normal business activity provides hundreds of opportunities to coach, hundreds and hundreds. And if the top management team understands and can use those tools and really can make them work, then in a gentle way, as part of normal business, they can be coaching the general manager class or the director class or the whatever, just by normal business, and even some shop floor members. Because if you direct, if you coach one shop floor member, you're automatically coaching all of their bosses. But if you don't know those things and you don't have those expectations and you can't coach them, then it means that progress will be much slower and the benefits which will be much less. Those are the three key points that I would suggest.
That was a great answer.
So, Carl, so you've had this, as Mark put it, illustrious career, working for two iconic companies, GM, Toyota. Undoubtedly, you learned a lot over the course of that career. Could you share maybe one or two just like pivotal experiences at whichever company where you were forced to really rethink the role of leader? What was it about that experience that led you to rethink the role of the leader?
The biggest one was naturally the move to Toyota and the studying of Toyota. That was the biggest influencer. And that was a really hard rethink. because I used to joke at the time, but it was only half a joke. I used to say, succeeding in Toyota, I only have one thing to do. It's really simple. I just take my head off and I put it on the other way around. And but it sounds easy, but that's really hard to do. And all of the things that I had led to my progress and success in the previous organization were not valued at all in my new organization. So it was a tough time. And that's why I say to organizations, don't be afraid of that, because you don't have to have that experience. I was joining an organization with 85 years experience and Kaizen, and I had to catch up. You could smell the clutch burning. But if you're changing your own organization, you can control the speed, and you can control you don't have to have that experience. But that was a pivotal one, because the things that I've talked about earlier on in our meeting, it's they're easy to say, but you have to learn them by doing them. And I think the other big experience I had was in leaving Toyota and then having the third part of the career, which was the supporting other organizations that were either not manufacturing or not Toyota. And I learned then that many of the things that I took for granted as basic weren't true. And I've talked to many people who leave Toyota who get frustrated and say, I know about this and I know about that, and I try to teach it, but it doesn't make any sense. And I say, no, because they're not ready for it. They're not at that level yet. They've got to take the baby steps before they can begin. You don't give a baby the control of a jumbo jet, do you? You just you don't do it. And as much as I respect, and I do respect, admire anybody who's succeeded in any organization, they've done it by their own skill, their ingenuity, their perseverance, the benefits that they brought. Everybody who's made it has made it on their own back, basically. So I also understand why somebody coming and saying you don't know what you're doing is kind of offensive. Whereas really the truth is you do know what you're doing, and you're already doing really good stuff. There is an opportunity, if you're interested, in even multiplying the power of the organization underneath you by many multiple factors, if you're interested. And with that comes flexibility, comes agility, comes, big business benefits. So yeah, in terms of the pivotal points for me, probably the biggest was moving to Toyota, and the second biggest was moving from Toyota into other organizations.
Sure. That changed the context, I'm sure. So continuing with this reflection on your career, Carl, looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, the answer is really just two. Either it's a million, or because every decision had some impact. I don't think I changed the fact that I had the 3 stages in the career, because the fact that I worked for GM for 24 years before joining Toyota gave me a big advantage, even from people within Toyota eventually, because I could really see what the difference was what made the key difference between performance improvement and what didn't. Whereas people from inside Toyota don't have that perspective. They've never worked outside Toyota, so they don't know what's key. They just know what they do. So I wouldn't change that. Probably one of the things would be I wouldn't have been so stubborn about insisting that everybody learns by doing initially. And I would have written the book earlier, because I believe the book genuinely is designed to help people have some kind of framework within which they understand their position and they understand the risks and the next steps and how to move. So I think that's really important. And probably I didn't write it earlier because I had this thing in my head that said, you don't learn the Toyota way by reading, you learn it by doing. But I think you can understand it by reading. And I think that's important for a lot of people. So that's probably the number one thing I would change.
That's really interesting, Carl. What's been a challenge or two that you've been addressing over the last year or so as you're in this kind of private practice, supporting various organizations? Is there like one particular challenge that really stands out that you could share with our audience?
The challenge that I've been facing this last few years is how to get the information that I've written down to as many people as possible. Because if they don't know about it, they can't decide about it. And I also think that there are a lot of people who are trying to support other companies out there who also would need some reference point that they can use to help their clients to understand the whole picture more and understand what their part of it is, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just, at my stage in life right now, I just want to help as many companies as I can, and including the people that are trying to support them, like consultants. And so really the biggest challenge, and I'm not very good at it. I am not good at promoting things. And if you said, Carl, what's the weakness in your self-promotion is a weakness. I'm not good at it. So that is something that I do find a challenge and I really would like to overcome.
Thanks for sharing. Hopefully this podcast can help in that regard.
Oh, that'd be great.
I think it's we ex-Toyota people struggle with that. I have this because I just obviously published a book too.
Yes.
Carl, and I've been promoting it a lot, and I can't say it comes naturally to me.
Yeah, it's a bit against the grain, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
And I have to say, having read your book, it's everything that I would want with it in terms of being practical and enough detail to be able to make it succeed if people will persist with it. And there aren't many books out there of that caliber. So I congratulate you. It's a good book.
Thank you very much, Carl. Appreciate that coming from you. Well, we're going to wrap things up here. Maybe you can just let us know, like, what's energizing you these days, like new work challenge, or even in your personal life. What's exciting for you?
Work-wise, I have to say I'm working with companies all over the place, and it's a lot of fun. And also because of technology, I mean, there's a company in Saskatchewan that I'm working with through the internet, and the president and I and the team meet every few weeks and you know do a review, and it's great. And I find right now that I get a real pleasure from being able to use new technology in ways that I'd never used it before, and to meet people all over the place without having to spend hours and hours on planes and trains. And it's really good. And if the need be of go and see, which is very important, happens, then you just go and see. It's really, so I really do find that stimulating. And also I'm trying to learn Spanish, which is stimulating in another way.
All right. Well, it's been great having you on, Carl. For those of you in our audience who are interested in Carl's book, we talked about it a fair amount in the course of this podcast. It's called The Balance of Excellence. Carl, how can they get your book?
Oh, it's just Amazon. Just go onto Amazon.
Okay.
If you can't get the book, just put my name.
Thanks for joining us, Carl. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Nice to talk with you.
Yeah, Carl, we really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Bye.